In 2003, shortly after the release of Metroid Fusion, longtime series shepherd Yoshio Sakamoto said in an interview, "If I can, I want this series to keep going. From here on out, I think I want to develop Samus as a character. I might also want to create a story going back to the past of Adam and Samus." Hey, it's me, Matthew, your husky host for another episode of What Happened, which today is being made possible by Flophouse VIP Big Boss Ian, who officially nominated the 2010 Nintendo Wii Classic Babyoid Other Baby. Yes, the very last non-remake, non-spin-off entry in the well-loved Metroid franchise, which I can now finally talk about on this show, after a long time of not talking about it. So, right out the gate, I'm going to be completely honest. This might be a very different episode than what you're accustomed to, because in the past, we've heard horrific tales about meddling marketing executives, disastrous engine switches, or just simple hot jars of moldy mayonnaise masquerading as people. When it comes to Metroid Other M, though, things get a lot more simple, like a lot more direct, but nevertheless, it still carries that distinct waft of what the hell happened. So make sure you have the proper authorization from your commanding officer, because we're going to delve deep into the story of how the creator of Metroid almost killed Metroid. It's 2002, and Nintendo brought back their sci-fi action franchise to the GameCube with Metroid Prime, whose greenlight was probably bolstered by the amount of young kids playing Smash Brothers in '99 and 2000, asking, "What's a Samus?" Anyway, we're not going to get into the nitty and or gritty of Metroid Prime here, as its development was a whole other thing, a very risky and experimental take on the series that shouldn't have worked at all, but became one of the reasons to own Nintendo's purple lunchbox. Along with it, perhaps as a precaution, they also fast-tracked a less expensive, safer bet with the aforementioned Metroid Fusion, a familiar-feeling 2D side-scroller for the Game Boy Advance. There hadn't been a new entry in the franchise since 1994, and since then, the Castlevania series had become the standard bearer for Metroidvanias, or to be more accurate, the genre, which from now should be known as search action. God, that's so great! Sakamoto, a designer and artist for the NES original and director of one of the greatest games of all time, Super Metroid, was tasked with handling Fusion and had very little input on the Prime series overall. Now, in terms of fan expectations, and even probably internally within Nintendo, it would be easy to assume that Fusion was going to be the slam dunk. It had an original creator working on it, and it was firmly sticking to its 2D roots. However, it was Metroid Prime that took most of the limelight, with Fusion being more of an afterthought in a lot of people's minds. Still, an extremely solid game in its own right, but its added narrative elements and character dialogue and slightly more linear gameplay and mission structure caused some to view it as inferior when stacked up against the mighty Super Metroid. Meanwhile, the Prime series only kept building with phenomenal reviews and strong sales. Echoes followed 2 years later, and Nintendo ushered in both the Wii and DS generations with Corruption and Hunters respectively, and both were made by Western studios, as well as pushing first person as the dominant style for the series. Conversely, Sakamoto and his team were tasked with doing a simple remake of the original NES outing with Zero Mission, an entry that again, while good, was overshadowed as it came out only a few months before the launch of the Nintendo DS, which kinda became a big deal. So, that brings us back to Sakamoto's quote from 2003, where he put forward his idea to implement more story into the Metroid universe, and it's pretty easy to deduce why. The Prime series kept Samus as silent as possible and was emphasizing complex 3D maps, puzzles, and new control methods. The 2D Metroid team at Nintendo of Japan couldn't really compete in those areas, but what they could do was offer something different. After Corruption's release in 2007, Retro Studios banana slammed into DK Island with Donkey Kong Country Returns, leaving a rare gap in Metroid releases, a gap that Sakamoto was quick to pounce on. The problem, though, was that Nintendo was firmly pushing forward with 3D games by this time, something that the Metroid handheld team had no idea how to do. The thought came to me that I could make something pretty amazing if I were to create a Metroid for Wii, but when it came to the actual development process, my team, to be completely honest, didn't have the know-how or the experience to develop something for 3D. That, and we didn't have the manpower either. I realized that I'd probably need to find a partner, someone to collaborate with in making my concepts a reality. I was looking for someone who not only understood my concept, but would also be able to contribute with their own experience. I was very fortunate at that time to speak with Mr. Hayashi and the team at Team Ninja. Ah yes, Team Ninja. In 2008, Captain Oatmeal Face was busy quitting/being fired from Tecmo, which left Yosuke Hayashi in charge of the Ninja Dojo. Hayashi, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, felt it would be a hearty challenge to help Sakamoto realize his vision, and also to provide programmers who actually understood 3D development. Team Ninja also supplied the engine, which was apparently a heavily modified version of what powered the first two Ninja Gaidens, as well as 3D artists and modelers. There is also a third player here, D-Rockets, a CGI studio who Team Ninja had worked with before on prior games. They bear special mention because instead of just providing an intro, an ending, and calling it a day, they would need to provide a good deal more of CGI animation, and when I say a good deal more, I mean a metric fucking shit ton. This is because Sakamoto, in his bid to provide something different than what was being offered by the Prime series, decided the world should peruse every single bland, uninteresting hallway of Samus Aran's Mind Palace. Shortly after Other M's formal announcement, both Sakamoto and Hayashi provided some, in retrospect, hilarious quotes. The Other M story will tie together what took place in Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion. One of my goals is to present Samus as an appealing human character, and that involves explaining a little bit about what happened in her past, as well as the characters that influenced her. The story will play a big part. Of course, Metroid is a very sophisticated action game as well, so our goal is to create an experience that is seamless between the cinematics and the actual gameplay. Hayashi's statement has aged even worse. One of our concepts that we like to keep in mind as we're progressing through development is to create Samus as this very appealing character, the ultimate female hero in the game universe, so we're keeping that in mind. Yeah, well, you failed. Now, Nintendo usually shies away from delving too deep into the personal backstories of its characters, and instead opts to immerse you more within the worlds themselves through clever level design, NPC dialogue, fun challenges, or just through pure atmosphere. Metroid's core appeal, however, was just how mysterious everything was. Outside of some obscure comics, you never learn much about Samus's past, the motivations of the space pirates, other than them being evil, of course, because the earlier games always prioritized the gameplay first and foremost. While playing Super Metroid, did you ever look at Samus while she's doing the Shine Spark and say, "Man, what is going on inside her head?" No, you didn't, but Sakamoto thought you did. So Other M was loaded up not with super missiles or power bombs, but with hours of cutscenes, introducing a multitude of characters that some people might have been familiar with, but many others would not be.
Remember me?
The main point of contention was the characterization of Samus and her relationship with one Adam Malkovich, a general in the Galactic Federation. When a character has been silent and mysterious for literal decades, you're setting yourself up for disaster if you don't handle it perfectly. And fortunately, Samus,
The baby.
was not
I was childish.
handled
And the baby.
perfectly.
If something like that happened again, I would hold fast to that glimmer of hope and try for redemption.
In a combination of perhaps misguided voice direction, mistranslation, or misinterpretation of the script, or just having a horrible script, Other M, in many fans' eyes, is the scene of a crime. the crime of character assassination. In Other M, she's presented as whiny and overly emotional, while simultaneously also being wooden and unassuming, and these are the impressions most had of Samus through the various trailers and previews leading up to Other M's release, and were only exponentially worsened when people actually played the game.
Me? I was known for giving the thumbs down during briefing.
And we haven't even talked about the actual game yet, because aside from the bloated and divisive story, there was a whole other set of issues when it came to the mechanics. Sakamoto wanted to force the concept of art out of adversity, which is something you should never force if you have a choice. He wanted to make, and I'm quoting him here, a Metroid game anyone can play. So he decided that Samus would be controlled by a single Wii remote, forcing the developers to think outside the box on how to get all of this to work, how to make a complicated search action game function with a limited set of buttons. I mean, thank God, because by 2010 everyone was sick to death of that awfully complicated nunchuck. It's just so, yeah, what is this? The solution was for about 85% of the game to be played via the NES style of holding the Wii remote, with the remaining 15% tasking the player to clunkily swing the remote forward to switch to a first-person mode, which will allow you to attack in first person. This was primarily used for boss fights and the just really weird and awkward point-and-click investigative sections, which again was something many felt didn't really work. It was trying to be both a fast 2.5D action platformer and a first-person shooter, sometimes. That blistering fast 2.5D action was the one thing that Team Ninja brought to the table that at least felt a bit refreshing. The game was gorgeous for the Wii, ran at a silky frame rate, and had some amazing fighting animations for the finishing moves that weren't too over the top for the franchise, instead fitting snugly just under the top. Because of all this, however, Samus was a bit too incredibly overpowered. Her new dodge move gave her complete invincibility from enemy attack, she could recover both health and missiles by simply charging a button, and the sense of dread and isolation Metroid was known for certainly didn't feel very dreadful or isolating. You were absolutely beasting on bosses and bopping their shit while yucking it up with a platoon of soldiers, John Malkovich, and a bunch of nerds throughout the entire story. In terms of gameplay, probably the most egregious change, and part of Sakamoto's "A Metroid anyone can play" mantra, was the exploration had been greatly reduced. You acquired the least amount of new items in any Metroid up to that point. There was also like one extra suit that barely looked any different, and since Adam needed to give Samus permission to use 90% of her shit, you didn't need to explore to find 90% of her shit. You just needed to progress in the story. Simply put, almost every core aspect of the series was either simplified or stripped out altogether. Why have exploration or power-ups or a heavy atmosphere when you can just have the baby, the deleter, the baby, delete. So, Other M was received much more savagely from fans, more so than critics, but even positive reviews would make mention of the game's flaws, and due to whatever other factors, wound up being a sales disappointment for Nintendo, with former president of NOA, Reggie Fils-Aimé, stating as such shortly after it launched. We believe that Metroid Other M should be a million-unit title. We're not going to get there, not through the holiday, and we are doing a lot of thinking as to why, because it's a great game. The consumer reaction, because of the quality, has been strong. I think the marketing was strong, advertising was very good, and the social media we did was very positive. Well, Nintendo certainly took their time thinking, because for the next decade, they released only 2 other titles featuring the intergalactic bounty hunter that fits inside a tiny metal ball. Those games were, of course, the 3DS spin-off Federation Force and the remake of the Game Boy title Return of Samus, with both having minimal involvement by Sakamoto. In fact, ever since Other M, Sakamoto has been relegated to producing WarioWares, Rhythm Heavens, Tamagotchi Life, and some various other obscure fare. Now, here's the thing. Everything I just outlined about Other M, the story, the gameplay, the controls, everything went exactly as planned. It was textbook. Nintendo didn't interfere or try to dilute the director's vision. There was no significant engine problems. The three teams had enough manpower and budget, and the entire project lasted for a svelte 3 years. Sakamoto has since claimed that if he was to do Metroid Other M all over again, he wouldn't change a thing, and that he regretted absolutely no decisions made on the project. He also felt that there wasn't really any aspect that could have been done any better, and that he saw his entire vision all the way through to completion, which I guess is pretty admirable. Sticking to your guns despite many opinions to the contrary. Fortunately, Metroid Prime 4 was announced in 2017, under development by a mysterious, still unnamed studio that was based maybe in Japan or China, was then cancelled and then restarted development from the ground up back at Retro Studios, who were working on their own unannounced title up until then, which may or may not be cancelled. Okay, so I guess in the next few years we might be slipping on the various suit once again here on What Happened. Thanks once more to Ian for nominating The Baby for this week's episode. And if you'd like to do much of the same, spider-ball your way into the Flophouse VIP Patreon to force me to tackle the game or movie you'd like to see in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching.